Thanks for joining us for another episode of Tricia Talks. Today we have Barbara Brodoway from Ward & Taylor, and today we're going to talk a little bit about surveys. What are they? How much do they cost roughly? And how important they are. Hi Barbara.
Hello. Hello.
So let's talk about surveys.
Okay.
How important is a survey? Why should you get one?
Oh, I think they're very important. A survey is where you get a buyer of a property has a surveyor go out and they get a bird's eye view drawing of what the property is, what you're buying. Some people will say, well, wait a minute, I looked at the county website, and on the county website it showed me a drawing. The county does not survey the properties. So even though the county may be generally accurate, it's not going to tell you where your property lines are. In Kent County and Sussex County, not only do you get a drawing showing where your property boundaries are, where any man-made items are on it. So it's going to show you where your driveway is, your fences, your sheds, the house itself, the deck, the pool, the pole barn, anything that's on there is going to show on there any man-made items. But in Kent and Sussex County, they also mark the corners, so you know exactly what you own. And that's important because we see people assume they know where property lines are, and they put fences in the wrong spots and sheds in the wrong spots, and sometimes it's pretty expensive to move those things.
Now, is a survey the same thing as a plot plan?
A plot plan usually deals with the subdivision. They're usually looking at the subdivision plan. So if you buy a property that's in a subdivision, when that builder built that subdivision, they did a whole subdivision plan that showed where all the different lots are. But that doesn't give the real details of exactly where the property lines are. It's going to show you generally the size of your lot, but it's not going to give you the same detail as a survey does for showing you exactly. And also the plot plan was done before anybody actually built on it. So it doesn't show you where your house and driveway and other things are on it.
That's true. So what are some of the survey issues that you've seen?
Okay, we see some bizarre things sometimes. The most common things that we see, the problems that we see with a survey, are basically where people put something in the wrong spot. Again, they think they know where it is. So in Kent County, when you put a shed on your property, you're supposed to have it, zoning says it needs to be 5 feet back from any property line. Well, somebody thinks their property line's here, but instead it's here, so they end up putting it right on the property line, or sometimes a little bit on the neighbor's yard. And a lot of times nobody really realizes that until the property's sold and another survey's done. A lot of properties, especially townhouse communities, have an area called private open space. So it's almost like a little parkland, but it's owned just by that community. Well, what we see a lot is that people who have a backyard, and their backyard may back right up to that open space, and what happens is neighbor number one decides to put up a fence, and they don't pay attention to where their property lines are, and they put their fence 10 feet into the private open space. Yeah. And then the next neighbor comes along and they make the same mistake and the same mistake and the same mistake. And so you see, we actually have had them where people have put swing sets, even an in-ground pool in the private open space. Yeah, that's not easy to move. You know, a fence, moving a fence, that's one thing. An in-ground pool in private open space, that's a big deal. So that's why it's so important to know exactly what your property lines are, and to know if, say you're the second, third, fourth, fifth owner of this property, to know if whoever owned it before you was putting things in the right spot, so you're not getting yourself into trouble.
So I suppose that means you shouldn't necessarily count on the fence company or the pool installer to do that correctly.
Oh no. I always tell people when they're getting a fence, because a lot of people that buy a house and the first thing they say is, I need to put in a fence, I got dogs. And I said, okay, good. I make sure that they have the copy of the survey, but I also tell them, again, in Kent and Sussex, the good news is that they're going to mark the corners. So I say wait and make sure they've marked the corners, and then when your fence person comes or whoever's putting up the pole barn or whatever they're going to do to the property, walk out there with them, show them where the markers are, give them a copy of the survey, and then follow up and make sure they're putting it in the right spot. Because they put up that fence, you pay them for the fence, they go away, and then 10 years later you sell the property, and that's when you find out they made the mistake, and it's hard to fix it 10 years later.
Speaking of fixing it, what are some of the ways that you can fix these issues?
Okay, that's good. So sometimes it's something like a driveway. Somebody has a driveway that's close to the property line and they widen it, and they widen it a little bit onto your yard or something like that. So some survey issues need to be fixed and some really don't, okay? So if you have a driveway and your neighbor's driveway is accidentally widened 2 inches onto your property, then it's not a make saying, hey, I know the driveway's a little bit on my property, but it's not a big deal. We can keep it that way. It's not going to be a problem. Same thing with the fence. If the fence is 10 feet on the neighbor's yard, you probably want to move it. If it's 10 inches on the neighbor's yard, you can usually do an easement agreement. And that's one of the things we do a lot. We help people to resolve these issues by, having neighbors be neighborly and agree with one another and not try to make a big deal out of something that's not a big deal. But again, it depends on the circumstance. So an easement, sometimes moving it, and some people just don't care. I mean, again, if it's a really small issue, like your one little corner of your fence is 3 inches on the neighbor's property, it's really not that big a deal that people may just say, look, if the neighbor ever asks me to move it, I'll move it then. You can waive it as well.
Okay.
Every once in a while, something is big enough that then they decide that they want to do a boundary line agreement, which is an agreement between the neighbors to maybe move a boundary line, but that's a pretty big issue, and that's usually if like a whole part of a building is on the neighbor's yard. And
Right.
we don't fortunately see that all that often.
Okay. All right, well, that's all great information, and thanks for joining us. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Tricia Talks. We'll see you soon.